Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we are talking about free agency winners and losers, as well as other news and notes around the NHL. Thanks again for checking us out here at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, where you can find all of our NHL content, as well as content from the NFL, MLS, NCAA football, and NBA. You can find all of our content there. Hit up our shop while you're there. Get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8. You won't regret it. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at I80_SportsNHL. The road to 1,000 is still on, and to those that are already following, thank you guys so much, because you guys are awesome, and without your support, we wouldn't be doing this. But away we go. It's time to be talking some NHL. I'm Brian. He's Tom. How you doing today, Tom?
Doing well. Big free agency day last week. Nothing crazy, not a lot of big guys moving, but definitely still a lot of moving.
Yeah, there was a lot of moving going around last week. I was sitting on a beach just retweeting all Wednesday afternoon. That was my afternoon, was just sitting on a beach and just retweeting all the crazy stuff that happened. And man, free agency frenzy is true to its name. But before we get into that, we've got to talk some NHL news first. So if you're here to talk about free agency winners and losers, check out a little bit later in this video, maybe towards the 8 to 10 minute mark. But away we go with some NHL news. First and foremost, John Tortorella has his next job in the NHL. We last saw him as the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, but he has just signed on to be an analyst with ESPN. So, Tom, I know you've got some thoughts on this because he is a former Rangers coach, and Tom and I have talked in the past about our somewhat disdain for John Tortorella, maybe a little lack of respect. But Tom, what's your immediate reaction to this? Is this just another reason to not watch ESPN for you?
No, it's just another excuse for Tortorella to find a job. I tell you the truth, that this actually isn't his first rodeo in TV. He worked for TSN after he was fired by Tampa, before he was hired by the Rangers, and he actually worked with the NHL Network for literally about 3 minutes back in 15-16, because I remember he took a whole year off after Vancouver let him go. He started with the NHL Network in 15-16, and he had that job for literally about 30 seconds before Columbus hired him.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a bad hiring. John Tortorella needs to make his money somehow, and ESPN definitely needs some, coaching expertise in the booth. This person who understands what decisions are made behind the bench. So this is a good plus for ESPN. We might have our, thoughts about John Tortorella, but ultimately this is a good move by ESPN. It just gives a little bit more credibility to their coverage. Moving right along in terms of news, the NHL schedule is slowly but surely being ironed out, but it's pretty much released, and it's looking like, if all goes according to plan, NHL players will be returning to the Winter Olympics in 2022, which would mean a 3-week break in February for such festivities and players to be able to play in the Olympics. Tom, what is your thoughts on this? Is this a good move by the NHL? Is this a good marketing ploy? What's up?
It would actually be a 2-week break. I love the fact that they're going back to the Olympics. I always love the players. I always love that the players were there. Hopefully they're coming back to it now. They're still dealing with insurance if players get COVID. They need to hammer that out. They're still hammering it out. But they're saying every day it looks more and more like this is probably going to happen. If this wasn't going to happen, I couldn't see them dragging this out this long. Because I remember back in 2018, they pretty much said, no, we're not going, and that's that. And there was no discussion about it, even though some players threatened to boycott their teams and go over and play. So I love the fact that they're going back to the Olympics. We need more best-on-best international competition in hockey. For everybody that says it doesn't make any money, whatever, fine, it doesn't make any money. And for everybody that says, oh, it risks the best players in the middle of the season, that's fine. Well, you know something? Soccer players in Europe have been doing it for years. They've been getting released to national teams for years, whether it be for friendlies, whether it be for qualifiers, whether it be for tournaments like the Euro, or whether it be for the World Cup, The fact is that some players do get hurt. Joe Sakic got hurt in 98. John Tavares got hurt in 2014. Can a player get hurt and miss the rest of the season? He very well can. But I love the fact that they're going to try and go back to do best on best again. And I always said that they should do a best on best every 2 years. It should be the Olympics, and then the even years where there's not the Olympics, there should be a World Cup. I always said it should be every 2 years they should do a best on best. So I love the fact that they're doing this. It's not hammered out yet, so I'm curious to see what happens. I think we're leaning towards it. One other thing as well, they haven't announced what they're doing with the playoff format yet. I know they were teasing some ideas around last year to keep it going like they did this year, where they were going to keep the number one through 4 strictly in divisions, no more wild card teams. And then your 4 semifinal winners would get reseeded, play the semifinal, and then play for the cup. Another idea they had was maybe expanding the wild card field a little bit, where only the top 2 teams in each division per conference are guaranteed spots, and then the next 6 would be ranked by wild card. But I've been thinking about that too, and I don't know how they would rank those teams and where they would place them. So that's just another thing to think about as well. Nothing about the playoffs yet either. So just 2 things to really look into when they announce news about the schedule from here on out.
Yeah, there's still ideas being floated around here, so not a lot to fully talk about in depth with this, but ultimately NHL players going back to the Olympics is a big positive and is great for the game in general, especially with the transition to ESPN, a little bit more of a marketable TV source for a lot of people.
The funny part about that is, though, if they go to the Olympics, guess who's going to be carrying the game?
NBC.
Exactly.
So they're not going to be fully done. Oh, love it. The last piece of news that we want to talk about real quick before we dive into our free agency winners and losers. I'm going to be able to talk at some point. It's going to be amazing. But Evander Kane, we have to talk about this because San Jose Sharks forward Evander Kane has landed himself in some hot water because there are accusations being floated around that he has bet on NHL games, and not just bet on just random NHL games, but his own team's NHL games, and has potentially even bet against the San Jose Sharks. And the source of which this is coming from is his ex-wife from Twitter. This has all been evolving over the past weekend from Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. It does seem like the San Jose Sharks are currently shopping Evander Kane and seeing if any team is gauging any interest in taking him on. There have been anonymous teammates from the San Jose Sharks that have said, we don't want him in the locker room anymore. So this is a sticky situation. Tom, I'm going to turn to you on this one first. What is there to believe? Do you believe Evander Kane's denial of these accusations? Do you believe his ex-wife? What are your thoughts on the current news story here?
I don't know what to believe anymore with Evander Kane. In my eyes, Evander Kane was always a very much overrated player. I never saw what teams saw in him. Never got it. As far as all this is concerned, you know what? I am inclined to believe it. He's had his problems in the past too. He had his problems when he was up in Buffalo with off ice things. I'm not going to really elaborate into it. We don't really need to rehash that. But yeah, I do believe it. And there's no room in the game for a guy like him. So obviously, they're going to have to look into this. San Jose is probably going to suspend him, and I would be hard-pressed to see anybody take him. If Evander Kane plays hockey again, I don't think it'll be here. If he's going to play anywhere again, maybe he finds a spot in Europe to play, and I don't even know if anyone would take him over there. But, yeah, he pretty much just ended his career, Evander Kane. I'd be shocked to ever see him in the NHL again.
It's weird with me because I always say never. Especially, with my fandom to like wrestling and things like that, and even in hockey, a lot of people said we'll never see Mario Lemieux ever play again after he retired the first time, and then he came back, and just a few years later. So it's a never say never type of attitude, but in this case, I'm so disappointed by Evander Kane because I did not think he was that overrated. I did see, why teams say he is such a skilled player, why he is a top 6 forward in this league, why he is a dominant top 6 forward in this league. What concerns me greatly is thinking in hindsight from this past year and the year prior, watching some games, some San Jose games, and seeing Evander Kane kind of hold back certain nights. And it's kind of led me to think, were these nights where maybe he was throwing his own game to win a bet? This is a guy who has been in money troubles for over a year now. He had a bankruptcy case and went bankrupt, and San Jose has been trying to help him out since. And accusations like this do not help this individual whatsoever. But for, just as a disclaimer and putting it out there, if you have a gambling problem, please, consider seeking help. It's definitely not a good, it's not a good habit. Help yourself out. If you ever feel like you need to reach out for help, make sure that you reach out to your friends and family to get that help. But, with Evander Kane, we're going to see what happens. This is going to be an evolving story. Right now, this does not look good. I think San Jose finds a way to get rid of Evander Kane. And where Evander Kane ends up after that, we'll just have to see, whether that's with an NHL club or maybe a club in Europe or maybe just his couch. We'll just have to see. A lot of evolving pieces there, and this is probably not the last time that we talk about this. But moving right along, we're going to cut out with the NHL news. Thank you for bearing with us if you're here to check out our free agency winners and losers, because now it's time to talk about that, because free agency officially opened up this past Wednesday, the 28th of July, and we had a lot that went on. If you're wondering our recap on like who went where, what were additions, what were subtractions, biggest additions, biggest subtractions, we're going to be talking about that on an individual team basis over the next coming weeks. So if you've got a favorite team, look out for your favorite teams episode coming up very, very soon before the beginning of the NHL season, because we're going to be doing that, and we're going to be talking about big additions and big subtractions. So what we're going to talk about today, just to start off, we're talking about some free agency winners. What team comes out of free agency looking better than they did the year before? And before Wednesday, of course. So that being said, Tom, I'm going to let you, run away with your thoughts here real quick. What teams do you feel are winners of free agency thus far?
Well, I'll start out with the team on your jersey, your New Jersey Devils. Liked what they did with Dougie Hamilton, bringing him in. It was maybe one of the worst kept secrets. They kept saying, when is it going to go down? When is it going to go down? A few people were afraid that the signing might not go through, but, they brought him in, legit number one defenseman. Good for them. They're trying to round out their team and hoping these young kids like Hughes and whatnot come along. I also like what Boston did, bringing in Nick Foligno. Really good move. Really good move. Again, addressing their depth. Depth was a big problem for the Bruins after their first two lines in the Islanders series. So they're bringing in Foligno. Where he'll play, I don't know, because that second line was pretty solid with Hall and Smith on it. They just lost David Krejci to go back because he wants to go back to the Czech Republic to play. So they're going to have to find a center to play there. I'm wondering if any of those guys can play center. Maybe that's what they want to do. Maybe use one of them as like a sacrificial center. I don't know. But still, Boston is definitely going for it, and I'm eating my words because I remember saying that Boston, if Boston showed any signs of struggle this year, they'd blow the team up immediately. I don't think that's happening. I think the Bruins are trying to go for one more Stanley Cup for that core of Bergeron and Marchand and the like. I like what the Islanders haven't done yet, because some of the worst kept secrets of the Islanders are that they have deals in place for Zach Parise, Travis Zajac, and Kyle Palmieri, 3 former Devils, coincidentally. They haven't been able to sign them to deals yet just because they have to make some room with their cap and deal with some arbitration issues. But the fact is, if they do bring those 3 guys, and I think the Islanders are really shoring up their team too, and the Islanders, as much as I hate to say it, a very, very early prediction, they might be a favorite to win that Metropolitan Division this year. We shall see.
Yeah, really interesting to see. And actually, it's a really interesting tactic by Lou Lamoriello of the Islanders to kind of, keep his moves a secret right now, because he is also trying to gain some leverage in trade talks right now, because allegedly, and this is going to be something that we talk about a little bit later, the Devils, the Rangers, and the Islanders are currently locking horns right now with St. Louis on a deal to, bring in Vladimir Tarasenko. And St. Louis is getting lucky with the fact that the 3 interested teams are 3 teams in the Metropolitan and direct rivals of each other. So they're just going to try to drive up the price any which way they can to get the best deal that they possibly can for Vladimir Tarasenko. So it's smart of Lou not to divulge these deals yet, because he doesn't want any team to know what he has in terms of cap space right now. So smart move by Lou Lamoriello. And that's not something I say very, very often. But that being said, it's time for me to talk about my personal winners. The Devils are an absolute winner to me. Not only did they get Dougie Hamilton, that was the prime piece of this puzzle for the Devils this offseason, but another big piece to the puzzle was also Jonathan Bernier, who is going to be coming on as a 1B option for Mackenzie Blackwood. And what's great about this is a goaltender that I wanted in free agency. And when I saw that he got dealt to Carolina, I thought Carolina surely had a deal in place for him, but they didn't. And the Devils swooped in. Yeah, they overpaid a little bit. And I've been seeing Devils fans that have chimed in saying, well, they overpaid for Hamilton, they overpaid for Bernier, but hey, you can overpay right now. You haven't even hit the cap floor yet. Overpay for a Hamilton, overpay for a Bernier, and especially overpay for a Hamilton so that way you can entice other future players in future free agencies to say, hey, you know what? I think I want to go to New Jersey. I'll sign a smaller deal to go to New Jersey so that way I can play with a guy like Dougie Hamilton. You make these moves for the future. It hurts a little bit now, but hey, PK Subban comes off the books next year, and now you can easily afford Hamilton. But love what the Devils did. It was great with those two additions, with what they did. I also really liked what Boston did. And what I'm laughing about with Boston is Toronto about 4 or 5 months ago had an internal argument with themselves, just like, okay, we can have either Taylor Hall or Nick Foligno. And the Bruins swooped in a week ago and said, you know what? Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno. So, Boston just, completely crushing Toronto in that regard right now. But then, losing David Krejci is a huge blow. It does suck. He was one of my favorite Boston players of all time, and it sucks to see him go. But, hopefully with the moves that the Boston Bruins have made, it'll hopefully make up for it. That, and also signing Linus Ullmark is a great move for Boston. I'm excited to see what Linus Ullmark is going to be able to do in front of a experienced defense. And that's going to be exciting to watch. Did I have another winner on here? I believe I did. Oh yeah, I know what my other winner was. This is an obvious one. The Seattle Kraken. Because, hey, they couldn't have gotten any worse. They weren't even a team last year. Nah, all jokes aside, still. Philip Grubauer, what a great signing for Seattle. Now they have a great 1-2 punch in Philip Grubauer and Chris Drager. And with Grubauer, he came in second for the Vezina this year. And as I'm going to allude to in a little bit, when we talk about losers, they really kind of screwed Colorado up here by taking on Philip Grubauer. So that's going to be really, really interesting to see for Seattle. I thought that was a really, really great signing. And this is a move for the future and a building block. Building outward from your defense and from your goalie outward. And looking good so far. But as I've said before, there are winners and there are losers. And of course, there had to be a couple teams that lost in free agency this year, and a couple did. So, Tom, I'm going to let you start. Who do you feel are some losers of this free agency? Who looks worse on paper?
I hate to say it. I don't know if they look worse per se. It's just the decision they made might not have been the greatest, and that's Colorado Avalanche. You pretty much lost Grubauer for nothing. You lost him for peanuts. You were so worried about Landeskog that you let your starting goalie and Vezina candidate walk. As good of a player as Landeskog is, and I understand he's their captain. I understand he's their first-line left winger. When it comes to that first line with him, McKinnon, and Rantanen, he's the weakest link of the three. If it were up to me, I would have tried to keep Grubauer around. I would have let Landeskog walk. I would have tried to find another right winger to slot in there, or, hopefully, bring somebody up from the minors. Remember, Colorado's prospect pool is among one of the best in the league, and they're a Stanley Cup contender. You don't hear those two words in one sentence very, very often. You don't. Maybe even never you hear that. So I didn't like what Colorado did. Another team, Carolina, they lost basically both their goalies. They brought in Freddie Anderson, who, okay, decent. You brought in Antti Ranta, who's on the older side. You lost your number one defenseman in Dougie Hamilton. And then you brought in Tony DeAngelo, who's been a cancer everywhere he's gone. And if you're listening, Tony, I'm sorry, but what do you want me to say? I don't know what Carolina is doing. Carolina beforehand and for the past few seasons was looked at as a team that might be a contending team in the Metro Division for the next few years, a team that's going to be sniffing first place, a team that might be contending for a Stanley Cup. Now they just took a huge step back. And it's funny because Rod Brendamore, was pushing them to do this and do that to keep his job. He finally signed that extension, and now look. Now, if I'm Rod Brendamore, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, why did I agree to this? Why did I agree to this? They pulled my two goalies and my best defenseman out from under me. Now what do I do? I guess another honorable mention here, or a dishonorable mention rather, is what my favorite boneheaded team, the Rangers, did. Was not a fan of this Ryan Reeves deal at all. Was not a fan. Understood Goudreau a little bit. Understood bringing Sammy Blais in because Pavel Buchnevich was going to demand too much money, and you wanted to start playing Kakko and Kravtsov in the top six. But Ryan Reeves, man, it's just straight overkill. Sorry. I'm sorry. There's certain times where teams have built themselves to beat opponents. Look at Detroit in 97. They got a little more gritty. They brought in guys like Joey Kosher, Brendan Shanahan, and Larry Murphy to go out and beat the Avs because they said they were too soft and Detroit won a cup. But more often than not, how many times did you see teams built with one opponent in mind and go nowhere? The Rangers themselves did it in 95 after the Flyers pushed them around on the ice. They brought in guys like Luke Robitaille and Ulf Samuelsson and Marty McSorley and Yari Curry, all with the mindset of beating the Philadelphia Flyers. Well, what happened? The Pittsburgh Penguins, who were a finesse team, skated circles around them. Hell, we want to talk about John Tortorella? We want to talk about ESPN? John Tortorella was the coach of the U.S. in that last World Cup, which coincidentally was on ESPN. And the MO, or the owners of that U.S. team, the message around them was they wanted to build a team that could beat Canada. Well, they built a team that couldn't beat Canada, couldn't beat a European All-Star team, and couldn't beat the Czech Republic. So I'm not a big fan of this Ryan Reeves deal. 34 years old. Okay, so you're going to put him out there to fight Tom Wilson. I remember back in 2012 with the Rangers when they lost to the Devils in an Eastern Conference Final Series. The reason they didn't win is because they had this big hulking fourth line that I'm sure you remember the Devils' fourth line skated circles around. So I didn't really like the Ryan Reeves deal one bit. I know a lot of people did. A lot of people want him to go out and get revenge. Great, go out and get revenge on Tom Wilson. Get in a fight on opening night and then, sit there while a guy like Morgan Barron, who should get the ice time, who is a big player, who's been a point-per-game player at every level, who showed a little bit of promise at the end of the season last year, sits in street clothes. That's a great idea. Anyways, I'm turning it over to you.
I mean, I don't blame you. I mean, I believe my tweet on the night that the Rangers made the trade for Ryan Reeves, I believe my exact tweet was, and on another episode of Tom Wilson lives rent-free in the New York Rangers' head.
Yes.
Which,
yeah. You actually texted that to me, but I was passed out. It was 10:30 at night. I just was tired that night, I guess.
It's my exact thoughts, though. I mean, this is just another countless example of Tom Wilson lives rent-free in the Rangers' head right now. Not only did they trade for Ryan Reeves, they also signed Jared Tenorti to a deal as well.
I forgot about that.
And two, bludgeoning, enforcer type players that only makes your team slower. And I don't know. I also thought it was an overpay for Ryan Reeves. Paying a third-round pick for the services of Ryan Reeves. I mean, it seemed a little bit much for me. It seemed a little steep. It's an honorable mention because ultimately I don't hate what the Rangers have done this offseason. To quote a friend of mine also on Twitter, a guy who's actually, guested on our show before, Jack Dawkins. I'd rather my GM not make any moves than make stupid moves. And in this case, sometimes less is more. And the Rangers aren't fully following that, but they're at least staying on the right path. I'll at least say that. But I hate to be, the person to repeat here and just kind of beat a dead horse, but Colorado, I mean, I'm going to elaborate on this point a little bit more than what Tom did, because not only do you lose Grubauer, but Colorado had to scramble to get a goalie after that. They overpaid for Darcy Kemper. You paid a first-round pick for Darcy Kemper. On normal circumstances, Darcy Kemper is not worth a first-round pick. I am sorry. I know this is actually something that I argued with some Arizona fans, and they said, well, he is one of the more underrated goalies in the league. I agree. There's you get no disagreement from me on that one. Darcy Kemper is one of the best kept secrets in the NHL. He's a very, very good goaltender and especially for the fact that he's on the opposite side of his prime right now. He is a very good goalie at 30 years old. But that being said, my statement still stands. He's not worth a first round pick. His numbers have shown that he's not worth a first round pick. Maybe you pay at highest in terms of value a second round pick, but even still, Colorado had to overpay to get a starting goaltender, which is never, never good. They were left with the bargain bin at the end of the night on Wednesday night for free agency, hence why they had to scramble to get Darcy Kuemper. You sign back Landeskog, and I do think it is important to sign back your captain ultimately. Your voice in the locker room for the past, 5+ years, that is important. So I understand Colorado's insistence on being able to re-sign him and putting a the microscope under that while also not paying attention to Philip Grubauer. To each their own. And for Colorado, at least you signed Ryan Murray to a cheap 1-year, $2 million deal. That's still not that bad. He's at least a serviceable, top 4 pairing guy. So, kudos to Colorado in that regard, but they still look worse on paper to me. I think Grubauer is a better goaltender than Darcy Kuemper in my mind. Lastly, for me, Carolina Hurricane. I'm still so confused as to why they made this move. With Bernier signing in New Jersey, trading Alex Nedeljkovic to Detroit now makes absolutely no sense. You traded Alexander Nedeljkovic for Jonathan Bernier, the rights to Jonathan Bernier, which obviously you didn't even sign him, so that was for nothing, and a third-round pick. So really, you just traded your starting goaltender and Calder finalist to Detroit for a third-round pick. Now, this kind of goes back to my point on Darcy Kuemper. Darcy Kuemper versus Alex Nedeljkovic. You put a blind study of just okay, which one's worth the first round pick, which one's worth the third round pick. Most people today would say Nedeljkovic was worth the first round pick and not the third round pick. Just opposites in terms of deal. Detroit got insane value for Alex Nedeljkovic, so kudos to the Detroit Red Wings for that deal. But in Carolina's case, you trade your future starting goaltender for a third round pick, and you also saved a little bit of money. So you signed Freddie Anderson from Toronto, who also missed, the majority of this past year with an injury. So there's going to be a lot of questions to answer, and they're also going to have to answer for, giving Tony DeAngelo a shot and defending that. Just nothing good there. Nothing good. And even if Tony DeAngelo does well, that does not make Carolina look good for their decision at all. It's a very questionable move. It makes me kind of question the morals of the Carolina Hurricane and their front office. And just, there's going to be a lot of questions to answer on day one of training camp when training camp opens up in September. So that's going to be very kind of curious to watch for Carolina. And I think my last loser, because once again, now I'm just going to beat a dead horse with another dead horse and just fly off the cuff here. The Canadians are still a loser in my mind for everything that we mentioned last week. So they're just still going to have to deal with that and the stupid moves that they have made. But other than that, those are our free agency winners and losers. And before we go, as per usual, it's time for our question of the week, which before, while we were talking about free agency winners, we were talking about Vladimir Tarasenko, and there is another forward who's being rumored of being dealt at the moment. His name, you may have heard of him. His name is Jack Eichel, plays for the Buffalo Sabres. And, well, the question of the week is simple. Which player gets traded first, Jack Eichel or Vladimir Tarasenko? Tom, I'm going to give you the floor. Who gets dealt first, Eichel or Tarasenko?
This is a real tough one because it's hard to say what either. I think that Tarasenko is going to go first just because he doesn't have the underlying health problems. Right now, Eichel is between 2 surgeries. The surgery the doctors want him to get will keep him out between 3 and 6 months. The surgery he wants to get will keep him out for 6 to 8 weeks. The problem is that nobody can decide what they want to do. Buffalo won't give their blessing either way. And now Buffalo is backing themselves into a corner, too, because he's still under contract. So I think they would still have to honor that surgery, even if he doesn't show up to training camp. So I'm going with Tarasenko here. But even so, I could see Tarasenko, even though as much as said he didn't want to be in St. Louis, I could see him being at training camp with the Blues if they can't find a suitor for him. If the Sabres can't find a suitor for Eichel, I don't see him going on the ice at training camp and his agent stepping in and saying, no, he's not going to risk himself on the ice without the surgery he wants. So I am going with Tarasenko here, but it's hard to tell with either one.
It's hard to tell with either one. And there's also fantasy trades being floated around of, the Rangers would end up getting both Jack Eichel and Vladimir Tarasenko in like a 3-team deal.
No.
And yeah, exactly. I don't want to be hearing any kind of I
wanted Tarasenko in that draft 11 years ago. That's what I wanted Tarasenko. I want nothing to do with him right now. If I had to pick, if I had a gun to my head, I would pick Eichel of the two. But still, anyways.
I also may have just said that to rile up Tom because I'm bored. But to me, I'm going to agree with Tom on this one because I think Vladimir Tarasenko is probably the one that moves first. I think he is probably the easiest one to figure out a deal on and, come to terms and agreement on a deal. Buffalo is going to they're going to play hard to get on Jack Eichel. And it's really unfortunate because Jack Eichel deserves so much better. He deserves so much more. And, the fact that Buffalo is playing games with his recovery and with his, rehabilitation from his injury is disgusting. And I think the Bagulas are going to have to take a good, long, hard look in the mirror. But of course they won't because they're just going to be, instead of looking in the mirror, they're just going to turn back and watch the Buffalo Bills game. I said it. But what are your guys' thoughts? We just provided our thoughts on the question of the week as well as free agency winners and losers and NHL news that just went on throughout the league. Let us know what you think. Comment down below. Let us know. Drop a like and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. We would love the support. We would love to have conversations with you guys. But if you can't find us on YouTube, where else can you find us? Glad you asked. You can find us at I can't speak today. i80sports.com. where all of our NHL content is on our website, as well as NFL, MLS, NCAA football, and NBA coverage as well. And while you're there, hit up our shop, get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8, and thank us later. And you can also follow us down below at i80_sportsNHL on Twitter. So if you would like to follow us, we would love to have you as one of our followers join the conversation on Twitter as well. But free agency has only just begun. There are going to be more moves that are going to be made over the course of the next week. So we'll try our best to recap that as well as start previewing what each team is going to look like over the course of the NHL season. We're going to be starting up those episodes rather soon. So you got to make sure that you check us out when that happens. But for now, we're going to wrap up here. I'm Brian. He's Tom. This has been another episode of NHL on i80 Sports.